Mention Scotland, and for many, images of castles, glens, lochs complete with monsters, tartan-clad Highlanders, whisky, shortbread, haggis and bagpipes all spring instantly to mind. Romantic heroes such as Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, Robbie Burns and Sir Walter Scott with his tales of Rob Roy and Ivanhoe all inspire the visitor to step back in time to enjoy the atmosphere of a landscape that, thanks to its mountainous terrain, has been little touched by the ravages of progress. If you travelled as the crow flies from the northernmost tip of Scotland to the southerly extreme, you would cover a distance in the region of 275 miles. However, if instead you followed the country's coastline, you would clock up something like 6,250 miles, and for the majority of your journey, you would see little evidence of human habitation. Scotland has a population in excess of 5 million people, but predominantly they make their homes in the country's central belt. And okay, so you will find plenty of wild, heather-clad countryside with scattered isolated crofts, but travel to any of the nation's major cities and you'll discover a very different cultural heritage, and none, it has to be said, is more fascinating than Edinburgh, the undisputed capital of Scotland. Whistlestop Edinburgh has been designed to give you a brief glimpse of as many of this great city's attractions as possible within the confines of 60 minutes. For the visitor to Edinburgh, it's very easy to wander the historic highways and byways, making detours from place to place on a whim, with whole days drifting into lost weekends. However, with the information contained within this programme, you should at least set out with a good strategy for what to see, so that you don't miss out on the many treasures that Edinburgh has to offer. And from then on, if a side street takes your fancy, or an old church or building merits your attention, let Edinburgh weave its magic, because you can be sure that one visit will never be enough, and anything you miss will just give you a fine excuse to come back again. Before we begin our tour of the city, it's well worth taking a brief look at a potted history of Edinburgh to set the scene. The most striking feature of Edinburgh is the great Castle Rock upon which the city's castle stands proud today. This strategic vantage point has been occupied since Bronze Age man first laid claim to it in around 1000 BC. With clear views over the Firth of Forth, any approaching invaders could be spotted, and through the forthcoming centuries there were plenty of them. As the city grew in importance, the castle's buildings became more dominant. Great Scottish kings based themselves at this stronghold, and through the ages such legendary figures as Robert the Bruce and Mary Queen of Scots all passed this way. Edinburgh developed along 4 roads, which set a straight course linking the castle end of the city with Holyrood Abbey, and this thoroughfare today is much better known as the Royal Mile, due to a royal palace being built on the site of the abbey at the end of the 15th century. Holyrood Palace is still the Queen's official Scottish residence, and every monarch since the 16th century has had considerable influence on Holyrood, making it one of the most historically fascinating royal palaces to be found anywhere. There was a time when Edinburgh almost lost its status as the capital of Scotland. Rioters in the city angered King James VI of Scotland so much that he threatened to remove the machinery of government to nearby Linlithgow in 1596. The wise folk of Edinburgh certainly knew the fiscal importance of being a capital city and instantly surrendered to the king's demands. The next fundamental change for the city of Edinburgh also came during the lifetime of this monarch, as the very same James VI of Scotland succeeded Queen Elizabeth I of England to rule the two nations in 1603 as King James I. Although the city's political influence dwindled, it remained the centre of the Scottish judicial system, with to this day Scotland maintaining its own very distinctive legislature. As the centuries progressed, Edinburgh became famous for its culture, with many Scottish literary giants being born in the city or choosing to live there. Scotland's national poet Robbie Burns came to Edinburgh in 1786, at a time when a new town was being developed to the north of the crowded, polluted streets of Edinburgh's centre. In fact, the city is still sometimes referred to by its aged nickname, Auld Reekie, a title dating back to the times when the overcrowded, smoke-belching chimneys of old Edinburgh blackened every nook and cranny. In true Georgian fashion, elegant squares and crescents flourished with designs from such great architects as Robert Adam, gracing the new town, where the stylish, fashion-conscious Scots of the day relocated enthusiastically. Advancing rapidly to the present day, Edinburgh is now best known as a major Scottish tourist attraction, with the world-famous Edinburgh Festival more than doubling the city's population through the month of August. This arts extravaganza was originally instigated in 1947 to counteract the privations of post-war Britain, and it's grown from strength to strength ever since. Even the Fringe Festival, which started life as a few haphazard, off-the-wall shows performed by students and amateurs, has blossomed into a much-loved, world-renowned occasion. It's worth mentioning here that if you want to see the Edinburgh Festival, then come in August. But if you want to explore Edinburgh the city, it's perhaps best to avoid the crowds and come at another time. For anybody visiting Edinburgh, whether you've plenty of time to explore at leisure or a whistle-stop break that necessitates sightseeing at speed, the castle is most likely to be your first port of call, and there is, in truth, no better place to start. Rising from the basalt core of an extinct volcano, today's Edinburgh Castle is an amazing collection of buildings and monuments commemorating much of the city's dramatic history, and for that matter, much of Scotland's national heritage. From the elegant sweep of the Royal Mile, the Esplanade, scene of the world-famous Edinburgh military tattoo, draws visitors towards the castle's 19th century gatehouse. Bronze statues of the legendary William Wallace and the tenacious Robert the Bruce stand proud either side of the entrance, and it's perhaps worth taking a moment to look at these larger-than-life greats so beloved in the story of Scotland. As the 14th century dawned, relations between Scotland and neighbouring England were at an all-time low. Edward I of England was not referred to as the Hammer of the Scots for his diplomatic skills, having seized the Scottish throne for himself, barbarically enforcing his own particularly unpleasant brand of law and order. However, the subjugation of the Scottish people wasn't quite as straightforward as he'd anticipated. Thanks to the heroic efforts of William Wallace, the patriotic Scot responsible for raising one of the most dramatic rebellions in Anglo-Scottish history. By uniting the many wild Scots feuding clans, Wallace won a major battle at Stirling Bridge against all odds. Even after defeat at Falkirk in 1298, Wallace escaped capture to terrorise the English from hiding amongst the heather-clad hills. Only betrayal by his own stopped Wallace in his tracks as his 7 years of glory came to an abrupt end in London when he was hung, drawn and quartered in 1305. Dead, but not forgotten, Wallace's cause was immediately taken up by Robert the Bruce, who was crowned Robert I of Scotland in 1306. English King Edward, the horrible Hammer, was dying by this stage, but was so enraged by the Bruce's coronation that he redoubled his efforts, sending extra armies to quell such infamy. This forced King Robert to spend the early part of his reign in hiding, where, if Scottish folklore is to be believed, the most famous of the Bruce legends occurred. Cold, wet and disconsolate, Robert the Bruce sat huddled at the back of a dark, damp, dripping cave, contemplating giving up the seemingly never-ending fight against the English that William Wallace had begun all those years previously. A spider at the cave's entrance was diligently spinning a web, but each time the endeavour was completed, the wind and the rain swept the glistening threads away. Each time, the spider climbed back up the rocks and started the web all over again, and Robert the Bruce was inspired to take arms once more and see the cause through. They do say that at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, when Robert the Bruce was outnumbered by the English 3-1, it was the memory of the spider that spurred the Scots on to one of their greatest victories of all time. Today, therefore, it's very fitting that these two great men should stand side by side at the entrance to Edinburgh Castle, guarding this magnificent bastion forevermore. Once inside the imposing castle walls, there are all manner of fascinating buildings from all ages of history. Dating from the early 12th century, St Margaret's Chapel is the oldest building here, an enduring memorial to the devout and wise Queen who was the mother of King David I, one of Scotland's greatest early rulers. This fine example of a Norman chapel was restored for Queen Victoria in 1853, and fortunately the building's character was preserved without the addition of over-ornate 19th century embellishment. It's said that you can tell the difference between tourists and the native dwellers of Edinburgh at 1 p.m. daily from Monday to Saturdays, when the time gun is fired from the castle battlements. Local folk will just nonchalantly check their watches, but visitors who've not been warned have been known to run for cover. This fine World War II gun has kept time here at the castle for many years under the watchful guidance of Tam the gun. However, you're actually watching this gun fire its last salute, because it's being replaced by a more up-to-date model. The 1 o'clock time gun is an Edinburgh institution that will continue undaunted, with Tam the gun providing visitors to the castle with a display of military expertise that's second to none. Fortunately, this is the only gun that's ever fired regularly, and when you see the size of Mons Meg, the famous siege gun, it's to say the least something of a relief. Dating back to 1449, this amazing piece of ordnance could fire its huge missiles over a mile in distance, but rather inconveniently, if it failed to hit the target, it took over an hour to cool down sufficiently to reload and try again. Always erratic, Mons Meg rather blotted her copybook by exploding in a salute to the Duke of York in 1682, resulting in her confinement to the Tower of London. Restoration to Edinburgh Castle was only negotiated in 1829, when the greatly influential author, Sir Walter Scott, pleaded Mons Meg's case. This outdoor location is a recent change, as the gun was kept for some years down in the deep, dark depths of the dungeons. Nevertheless, it's well worth visiting the vaults, as the French dungeons are known, despite Mons Meg being now on display outside St Margaret's Chapel. The graffiti you'll find carved into the walls was inscribed by the Napoleonic prisoners of war who were kept here and who gave the dungeons their name. Above the dungeons stands the Great Hall, delightfully worthy of note. The Scottish Parliament met here until 1639, and this historically significant building has been sympathetically restored, much to the delight of all who visit here. The palace is of similar age and contains a superb display of Scotland's crown jewels, as well as the Stone of Destiny, a vital part of the nation's heritage. The Stone of Destiny was symbolically used for the coronation of Scottish kings, until Edward I of England, the Hammer of the Scots from the William Wallace story, absconded with the stone and took it to Westminster Abbey in 1296. Centuries later, the Stone of Destiny has been returned to its rightful place in Scotland, and it's certainly been a popular restoration. Edinburgh as a city played a vital role in the tragic life of Mary Queen of Scots, and it's here in the palace, on the 19th of June 1566, that she gave birth to James VI of Scotland, later to become King James I of England. A saga of mismatched marriages, scandal, murder and intrigue surrounded Mary, until, after 18 years' imprisonment in England, she was finally beheaded upon the orders of her powerful cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. But more of Mary later, when we visit Holyrood Palace. There is very definitely a military atmosphere pervading the many buildings of the castle, and the fine Scottish National War Memorial is a beautiful and poignant tribute to the many brave Scots to have lost their lives fighting for king and country. However, as you leave the old guns and battlements behind to start the Royal Mile towards Holyrood Palace, there can be nowhere more peaceful and tranquil than the lovely Princes Street gardens. This veritable green oasis at the heart of Edinburgh's busy, bustling centre was created to give access to the new town in the late 18th century. The mound was literally the accumulated mounds of earth from the building works, deposited into what was once a lake, dating back to the castle's 15th century defences. In the summer months, the West Garden's floral clock is very popular with visitors, and countless wits are able to address an imposing statue with the words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." This statue commemorates the legendary Scottish missionary and explorer David Livingstone, the first European to discover Africa's Victoria Falls in the mid-19th century. From here, it's impossible to miss one of Edinburgh's best-loved landmarks, the Scott Monument. This imposing Gothic edifice is a fitting tribute to Edinburgh's most famous son, Sir Walter Scott, whose evocative poetry and novels served to put Scotland well and truly on the international literary map. Great romantic heroes such as Rob Roy were brought to life by his imaginative pen in a celebration of Scottish culture which is much loved all over the world to this day. Sir Walter Scott's own story is a rather salutary warning to the generous-hearted. As his writing brought him the rewards of success, he backed friends in a publishing venture, but unfortunately, when they became bankrupt, Sir Walter Scott found himself liable for an enormous debt that was not of his making. Repaying the huge sum was beyond even the famous author's means, but he determined tenaciously to clear every penny of it. Scott wrote novel after novel, driving himself to eventual ill health, and even then he moved abroad to warmer climates to try and continue with his work. But it was hopeless. The man was broken and exhausted, and Scott returned to his homeland to die, having paid the ultimate price for his honour. Appreciative of Sir Walter Scott's talent, the good folk of Edinburgh wanted to erect a memorial to him soon after his death in 1832, and it was decided that a great competition should be held to select a design. George Meikle Kemp, a self-taught draftsman, won the day, and by 1846 his 200-foot-high tower had become a popular addition to the Edinburgh landscape. If you're feeling energetic, it's well worth climbing the 287 steps to the top viewing platform, as the views across the city to the Firth of Forth are spectacular. Having veered away slightly from the Royal Mile to take in Princes Street Gardens and the Scott Memorial, we can now get back on track. The Royal Mile actually incorporates 4 of Edinburgh's most ancient streets. The first of these is Castle Hill, where there are a number of treasures to look out for. The Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre is a wonderful port of call for anyone looking to discover more about Scotland's national drink, and with true Scottish hospitality, you'll even be able to enjoy a wee dram before passing along your merry way. On the opposite side of the road stands the Outlook Tower, a building dating back to the early 17th century. However, it was a lady called Maria Short's addition of an upper floor in 1852 that still brings visitors to this attraction today. Here you'll find the Camera Obscura, a large pinhole camera that records life on the Edinburgh streets as it happens. At the time of the camera's installation, this was nothing short of miraculous, and although modern technology has raced on apace, people love to see this Victorian relic of photographic history. Passing from Castle Hill into the Lawn Market, the Tolbooth Kirk, proud owner of Edinburgh's highest spire, heralds the old town's most distinctive buildings, the tall, narrow tenements known as lands. Incidentally, the Lawn Market has nothing to do with flat green grass. The name is due to the cloth lawn that was once sold here, in what would have been, by 17th century standards, the smartest part of Edinburgh. Pleasant and interesting as the lands might look today, there was a time when walking this street was a dangerous business. Before the advent of sanitation, all household waste, animal, mineral and vegetable, would have been thrown out of the windows, which could mean something extremely unpleasant falling upon you from a very great height. Only the foolhardy would ignore the warning cry of "Gardez loo," which was a classic Scottish interpretation of the French expression "Gardez l'eau." Fortunately, no such peril will beset the modern visitor, but signs for Gladstone's Land may well prove a little confusing for visitors wondering what the connection between Queen Victoria's unamusing Prime Minister, William Gladstone, and this tall, thin house might be. In point of fact, this fine building takes its name from Thomas Gladstone's, a wealthy merchant who bought the house in 1617, and has nothing whatsoever to do with Mr. Gladstone PM. Today, this museum displays a typical home of a wealthy Edinburgh family in the early 17th century. Look out for the collection of wooden overshoes that even the rich and famous of the city had to wear to walk the dirty streets of Edinburgh. And having heard all about the ancient waste disposal customs of long ago, it would seem to have been a very sensible precaution indeed. Before moving on to the High Street section of the Royal Mile, many people will take great delight in ducking through the narrow entrance to Lady Stairs Close, an enclosed square surrounded by high tenements. The literary credentials of this hallowed spot are quite immense, as this is where Robbie Burns stayed when he first came to Edinburgh, and the Writers' Museum occupies Lady Stairs House. This is without doubt a mecca for anyone who wants to investigate Robbie Burns and Sir Walter Scott. And what's more, Robert Louis Stevenson, author of such wonderful novels as Treasure Island and Kidnapped, was also born in Edinburgh and is featured here in some style as part of this tribute to Scottish literature. At this point along the High Street, just before glancing upwards to the lofty architecture of St Giles Cathedral, there's an interesting landmark at ground level, which most people pass over without even noticing. On closer inspection, you'll find the heart of Midlothian, literally marked out in stones at your feet. This is the exact location where the old Tolbooth prison used to stand, evidently not one of Edinburgh's most popular historic institutions, as it's said that local custom requires you to spit upon the spot. Sir Walter Scott featured this prison in his novel The Heart of Midlothian, and when the building was demolished in 1817, he was actually presented with the entrance gate, which can to this day still be seen at the author's Abbotsford house. St Giles Cathedral is properly known as the High Kirk of Edinburgh, and it's here that today's Queen Elizabeth and her family worship when in residence at Holyrood Palace. The cathedral is most famous due to its 16th century minister John Knox, a worthy adversary for the lively, sensual and Catholic Mary Queen of Scots. The fiery Calvinist preached many of his reforming sermons from St Giles Cathedral, passionately arguing the Protestant cause. Darkly Gothic and atmospheric, the cathedral dates back to the 14th century, but a great deal of heavily ornate restoration took place in the 19th century, giving today's visitor a dramatically spiritual experience and an amazing sense of history. It's very easy as you carry on down the Royal Mile to completely miss the Mercat Cross, which marks Edinburgh's historic city centre. There has been a cross on this site since the 12th century, where public festivals, trade, barter, executions and proclamations have all taken place throughout the ages. Bonnie Prince Charlie, famous of the Skye Boat Song, was proclaimed king here in 1745, and the men who would lose their lives at the tragic Battle of Flodden Field marched to their fate from Edinburgh's Mercat Cross. Today's cross dates from the 1880s, and there are 8 medallions around it, including the arms of Britain, Scotland, England and Ireland. We come next to the Tron Kirk, which is an elegant Palladian Gothic construction dating back to 1637. The name comes from the public waybeam known as the Salt Tron, which used to stand outside here. The church was last used for worship in 1952, and today it houses the Old Town Information Centre, a well-positioned stopping off point for Edinburgh's thousands of annual visitors. Beyond Tron Kirk, the Royal Mile enters Canongate, a once independent district of Edinburgh owned by the canons of Holyrood Abbey, the ruins of which still stand at the end of this final stretch. The restoration work here has been exceptional, and there are a whole variety of splendid museums, as well as the famous John Knox's house for visitors to explore. John Knox's house dates back to 1450, and the fact that the fiery preacher lived here during the 1560s has ensured its survival. It's easy to spot the house from further up the Royal Mile, as this is the house that juts out into the street, and many visitors come to Edinburgh especially to wander through the room where Knox is said to have died. Along with relics from the great man's life, there are displays which chart the progress of the Scottish Reformation, as well as the political and religious upheaval caused by the actions of such devout believers as John Knox. This is without doubt a fairly complex period of Scottish history, and a visit to John Knox's house may well prove enlightening. There couldn't be a greater contrast in museum style at this point in our journey, as on the opposite side of the street is Edinburgh's much loved and reputedly very noisy Museum of Childhood. Far more than just a toy collection, a city councillor created this magical experience in the 1950s, featuring every aspect of childhood, despite being notorious for his own well-publicised dislike of children. Evidently the project was envisaged as a nostalgia-filled attraction for adults, but judging by the numbers of youngsters who regularly flock in, the formidable city councillor has had to learn to share his toys. Moving ever onwards, we come to the Canongate toll booth, which dates back to 1591. This distinctive building, with its striking clock tower, was the focal point for civic life in the Canongate borough, even boasting its own law courts and a jail until the mid-19th century. Today, this classic building houses the People's Story, an amazing experience that allows visitors an insight into the city's social history. The focus is on the lives of Edinburgh's ordinary citizens from the late 18th century to the present day, with reconstructions that are truly evocative of ages past. Attention to detail here is remarkable, and even better news, there's no admission charge for visiting this superb exhibition. And so, we come to the end of the Royal Mile and the beautiful palace of Holyrood, set in the most dramatic of landscapes. Today you can still see the ruins of Holyrood Abbey, from which the palace takes its name. The abbey was founded by King David I in 1128, after, as legend has it, his royal personage was thrown from his horse after being attacked by a giant stag. In the ensuing struggle, David found by some miracle a crucifix tightly grasped in his hands, with which he was able to ward off the fierce animal. That night, he dreamt of building a monastery upon the very spot where all this had occurred, to be named Holyrood, meaning Holy Cross, to commemorate his deliverance. Holyrood Palace did not come into being until some considerable time later, when, at the turn of the 16th century, King James IV built a 4-storey tower with gabled roof and balustrade. The present-day northwest tower has been cleverly extended, with most of the construction taking place in 1671 around an Italian-style courtyard. At the time of filming, Holyrood Palace had been rather overshadowed by the building of the new Scottish Parliament, but hopefully, once completed, the picturesque quality of this climax to the Royal Mile will be restored to its former glory. The palace has been associated with many monarchs through the ages, but perhaps the most famous story is that of Mary Queen of Scots and her Italian secretary David Rizzio. As mentioned earlier, Mary was unfortunate in her choice of husbands, and Lord Darnley, her second spouse, was an unmitigated disaster. With gossip rife about Mary and Rizzio, Darnley became incensed with jealousy, and he and a group of fellow conspirators set upon Rizzio and stabbed him to death in Mary's staterooms here at Holyrood, in front of her very eyes. The poor Queen was 6 months pregnant at the time, carrying the future James VI of Scotland, and she was distraught at the loss of her favourite. Rizzio's 56 stab wounds confirmed the ferocity of the murder, and for centuries afterwards it was said that you could still make out the bloodstains on the palace floor. Today, a simple plaque marks the spot where Rizzio fell, ending one of the many tragic chapters in the life of Mary Queen of Scots. Leaving the horrors of history behind, a stroll into Holyrood Park is the perfect antidote to such desperate dark deeds. The park, and in point of fact the entire city of Edinburgh, is completely dominated by an extinct volcano known as Arthur's Seat. Visitors can relax, as there's no danger of this volcano becoming reactivated. It hasn't so much as gurgled for 350 million years. The name suggests a connection with the mythical King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, but it's generally thought more likely that it's a corruption of the word archer, as anyone armed with a bow and arrow would certainly have had a fine view of any target from here. Amongst Holyrood Park's other striking attractions, the Salisbury Crags have to be the most dramatic, and their stark red cliff-face profile can be seen alongside Arthur's Seat from all over the city. If you can spare the time to climb Arthur's Seat, it's a rewarding experience, with stunningly beautiful lochs to enjoy along the way. St Margaret's Loch is nearest to the palace, and with resident swans nestling under the shadows of the ruined St Anthony's Chapel, the view is delightful, and even if you only get this far, it's definitely worth making the effort. A lot of people prefer to drive up to the car park at Dunsapie Loch, close to the summit of Arthur's Seat. But be warned, the short distance includes a couple of steep rocky scrambles, and the road is closed on Sundays. completed the Royal Mile, our next port of call has to be Princes Street, Edinburgh's great shopping thoroughfare. Lined with department stores and stylish boutiques, Princes Street runs parallel to the Royal Mile, virtually cutting the old and new town in two. For the great majority of shoppers here, no visit to Princes Street would be complete without a trip to Jenner's, the oldest independent department store in the world. This remarkable shop, with its 6 traditionally splendid floors, selling a range of top quality merchandise, was founded in 1838. Jenner's has actually conducted business from its present day site since 1895, priding themselves on their excellent record of service and old-fashioned courtesy for generations of Edinburgh's most discerning shoppers. From Princes Street, or Edinburgh Castle for that matter, you can't help but notice a striking collection of constructions high upon the gentle rise of Calton Hill. Bizarre as it may seem to find a replica of the Parthenon in the heart of Scotland's capital city, the strange appearance of ancient Grecian architecture is as recognisable as any other of Edinburgh's landmarks. Unfortunately, however, the Parthenon hasn't always been quite as well thought of as you might at first imagine. A grand scheme was planned to build a national monument to commemorate the dead of the Napoleonic Wars, but civic pride was quickly dented when funds ran out, and for some time the half-finished Parthenon was the cause of considerable embarrassment. But today, the people of Edinburgh are rather fond of their unusual folly, and any plans to complete the design would never be contemplated. For visitors too, the Parthenon is certainly a popular destination in all its ancient, if unfinished, splendour. The nearby Nelson Monument fared rather better as construction was completed on schedule. The tower, which for the energetic prepared to climb the steps provides a wonderful view across Edinburgh, was built to commemorate the Battle of Trafalgar and was completed in 1816. Also housed here is a remarkable timepiece in the shape of a white ball on the mast at the top of the tower. This is a much quieter way to mark 1 o'clock in Edinburgh than the noisy time gun. The white ball gradually rises, and as the clock strikes 1, it swiftly drops. Ironically, the best place to view this is from the battlements of the castle. That is, of course, if you can hear yourself think as Tam the gun lets off his famous 1 o'clock salute. At the summit of Calton Hill, the classical theme is continued with the City Observatory. Designed by William Playfair in 1818, the elegant building was based upon an Athenian temple. Although the actual observatory is only open to the public by appointment, one of the domes has been converted into a theatre, showing the Edinburgh experience, which has proved very popular with visitors to this vantage point high above the city. With stories of the great, the good, and the not-so-good of Edinburgh still reeling in your mind, this is the perfect time to find a peaceful spot to rest a while.
Hey Johnny Cope, are you walking yet? Or are your drums beating yet? If you were a walking, then I would wait to gang to the coals in the morning. Cope sent a challenge frae Dunbar, saying, Charlie, meet me and you dare. Then all knew the art of war if you gang with me in the morning. When Charlie looked the letter upon, he drew his sword, the scabbard from. Come follow me, my merry men, and we'll meet Johnny Cope in the morning. Up now, Johnny, be as good as your word. Come, let us try both fire and sword, and do niffly like a frightened bird that's chased for its nest in the morning. When Johnny Cope, he heard of this, he thought it wouldn't be amiss to have a horse in readiness to flee away in the morning. Hey Johnny Cope, are you walking yet, or are your drums beating yet? If you were a walking, then I would wait to gang to the coals in the morning. fray now Johnny got up and ran, for the Highland bagpipes make a din. It's better to sleep in the hailskin, for it will be a bloody morning. When Johnny Cope to Dunbar came, they sneered at him, where's all your men? The devil confound me to my ken, I left them away in the morning. Up now, John, ye were not late to come with the news of your own defeat, and leave your men in such a strait so early in the morning. In faith, quoth Johnny, you got such flakes from their claymores and the filibegs. If I face them again, they'll break my legs, so I bid you all good morning. Hey Johnny Cope, are you walking yet, or are your drums beating yet? If you were a walking, then I would wait to gang to the coals in the morning. Hey Johnny Cope, are you walking yet, or are your drums beating yet? If you were a walking, then I would wait to cross our swords in the morning.
It may seem a strange concept in one of Europe's busiest cities, but literally, within walking distance of Edinburgh's busiest streets, you'll find the lovely and fascinating Dean Village. Thomas Telford's Dean Bridge was built in 1829 to span the Water of Leith, a small river in a delightfully wooded gorge at the northwest of Edinburgh. Many visitors choose to take the charming riverside walk through Dean, which twists and turns, passing a variety of historic buildings, crossing the river back and forth by a series of footbridges. From the Middle Ages onwards, Dean was Edinburgh's milling centre, and there are a number of delightful 19th century mill houses that have been carefully restored, although they are now used as private dwellings. Dean Village just goes to prove what a city of contrasts Edinburgh is. It has to be said that one of the major reasons for the continued success and popularity of the city is the remarkable sense of adaptability shown by the good folk of Edinburgh through the ages. The old and new towns stand side by side, with ancient and modern architectural style blending perfectly together wherever you look. Our last destination on this whistle-stop tour is perhaps the most tangible example of how Edinburgh has been able to transcend the passage of time. The Royal Museum of Scotland is housed in a magnificent building that was designed by Captain Francis Fowke in 1888, a veritable monument to the era's ideals of self-improvement. With warrens of corridors and rooms running off a truly impressive central hall, the place was crammed full of everything from stuffed animals to the most precious ancient relics of Scottish history. By the late 20th century, it was evident that a Museum of Scotland on this scale definitely needed more space, and a new extension was built to house the complete story of Scotland. And so, stood next to the Victorian grandeur of Captain Fowke's Flight of Fancy, you'll see one of the most important modern Scottish buildings. The contemporary designers Gordon Benson and Alan Forsyth confidently changed the appearance of Chambers Street forever, and visitors from all over the world come not only to see the 1,000+ exhibits, but also the fabulous new buildings in which they are housed. The pleasant irony is that one of the most popular exhibits is devoted to modern Scotland as perceived by our people. The public were invited to choose objects representative of the age in which they lived, and the result is a unique image of the modern-day Scot, alongside the most precious ancient artefacts belonging to Scotland's rich and fascinating history. With time up, having tried to squeeze as many of Edinburgh's attractions as humanly possible into this whistle-stop tour, there are still many other locations that are well worth visiting that have not been mentioned here. For that is the true mark of how great a city Edinburgh is, and a visit here, no matter how brief, will be sufficient to bring you back again and again. When Queen Victoria first visited Edinburgh, she remarked that it had made a very great impression, and for a lady who was notoriously tricky to amuse, the fact that she went on to describe it as being quite beautiful and totally unlike anything else she had ever seen was praise indeed. Hopefully this will prove to be the case for anyone who follows in our illustrious footsteps, and of course the footsteps of the many other great historical characters to have passed this way. Whether whistle stopping or taking a lengthy vacation, Edinburgh has a great deal to offer the visitor of every nationality, and as for the native folk of the city, well, they wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of auld lang syne? For auld lang syne, my dear, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for the sake of auld lang syne. And surely you'll be your point stop, and surely I'll be mine, and we'll take a cup of kindness yet for the sake of auld lang syne. For auld lang syne, my dear, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for the sake of auld lang syne. We twa run about the braes and put the goings fine, but we wandered many weary foot for the sin of auld lang syne. For auld lang syne, my dear, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for the sake of auld